And if I tilt the back of a hive, I can tell you if it's really, really light or it's really, really heavy. And if I go back to next week, I cannot remember even whether it was really, really light or really, really heavy. But certainly I can't tell you how much change there was. And so it occurred to me that these days you can get scales for weighing things on eBay that are really cheap. So I got some large scales with a display, and I thought I'll put that underneath the hive. But to start with, I put it in the house, and I put some weights on it, and I watched it over a few days, and the weight went like so, because it varied enormously with temperature. In other words, just whacking some scales underneath isn't enough to do it. You actually do want something which is designed for the purpose. In particular, temperature stability is important. So the stuff I'll be telling you about is designed for the purpose, and through sheer chance I ran across it at an Australian beekeeper's site, and it looks interesting. Besides which, it's electronics and kits, and that sounded like fun, so I got some. So the next slide, please, Libby. All right. So this is a Langstroth hive, 2 boxes, 2 supers, queen excluder, and here, there, if you look hard, you'll see the word Broodminder. That thing underneath there is scales. It's actually 2 sensors, one left, one right. And at the back is just a pivot, fulcrum for the rear. So that's what I'll be telling you about. That's what I have, but of course there's more in the range than that. So let me introduce you to the Broodminder range. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is the scale, and that's what we have underneath. In fact, it's Libby's hive. So it can take up to 180 kilograms, 5 gram resolution, temperature compensated. Really, really important, because the temperature goes up and down day and night and so on. It's in the sun. If you're going to have any idea of really what the weight is, you need something which is capable of dealing with changing temperatures. It stores the weights, so it takes a reading every hour, and it stores them for up to 6 months. And then what you do is you go up not too far from the hive, and you download the weights. And you download it using a radio connection called Bluetooth. You might be familiar with using it for headphones or something like that with a phone. So an iPhone, Android phone, tablet, iPad, that sort of thing. You download the software from the App Store, and you go up to within a few meters of the hive. It finds the hive, or the sensor. It sucks down the samples, and it displays them. And it also then prompts you to send them back up to a cloud-based server system which keeps your records of the hives and the weights. So I hope that's clear. And it runs on button cells, and the button cell lasts about 6 months. So it does mean you have to change batteries. You would not have one of these in every hive, but you might have a few of them in an apiary to get a sense of what's happening in the area for that apiary. Okay, next one please. As well as scales, they also have temperature and humidity sensors. And these, the scales go underneath the box, the temperature ones go inside the box, and you slot them in between boxes, and it sits there on top of the frames, and you can have maybe 1 or 2 temperature sensors, and they're used to record the temperature and humidity. And the same deal with Bluetooth and uploading information. The prices here are in Australian dollars, so it's $103 for a temperature and humidity sensor, and $287 was the previous one with the scales. I thought initially that I might have a look and see if I could import them from the US more cheaply. Yes, but by the time you add on the freight, it comes to no difference at all. So you may as well do as I did and get them from a local distributor who's a big supplier in Sydney. Next. if you're really into this and you had several sensors per apiary, you don't want to be wandering around with a phone or a tablet sucking out the information, because you do that quite frequently. What you'd like is for it to happen somewhat automatically. And so what they also sell is a Broodminder Wi-Fi or cellular hub. So that can talk to many sensors, up to 80 different sensors for weight and temperature. And what it does is every hour it goes around, talks to all the sensors, sucks down the latest information, sends it up onto the cloud, and you can see what's happening with your hives, or some of your hives, whenever you choose to look at it on the cloud. It says Wi-Fi or cellular, so Wi-Fi is the link to the internet. If you have it close to a house, you could conceivably use Wi-Fi. If you had it out in the boonies, but not very far out the boonies, then you could use a mobile connection. But you'd want to make sure you had a plan that was fairly accommodating and not too expensive, because you're sending stuff every hour, every day, for years.
Sorry, G4 can be a bit unreliable in heavily wooded areas.
Yeah, I think this is probably 3G anyway. It predates sort of 4G stuff. But whether it's 3G or 4G, you'd want to check the plan fairly carefully. Wi-Fi is normally an adjunct to a permanent internet connection. Next slide. So, what might it look like? What might you see if you actually had a record of the weight of a hive? Now, this was taken in Virginia in 2016, 2017. It's Americans, so they're mad keen on throwing sugar at things. So feeding is a big deal here. And the things that make the biggest difference are feeding. So I'll read it out to you, because I'm assuming here at the back you can't read it. There's a nectar flow in June that comes along, and then they start to steal the honey. They rob the honey out of the hives, and of course the weight comes down then. Then they start feeding in autumn, and it goes up and down as they feed and try and keep the hive alive. Over winter, there's some consumption. A bit of snow builds up on the hive, and then it melts again. And then in spring, they do a spring feed to stimulate, and then the bees sort of go down into spring, which is their leanest time, and then the nectar flow starts, and whoosh, they're up again. Okay? If only it looked that neat. But that's sort of an ideal, and it's what they give as an example. But I promise you, in the real world, it doesn't look quite that neat, because you're fiddling with things. But they've tidied that up a lot. Nonetheless, the concept is clear, that you can actually see what's happening with the bees. Do you need to feed them? Is feeding having an effect? Do you need to feed them more? Is there enough to rob? Etc. So rather handy to see what's going on. Next one, please. This one I found really quite fascinating, because it has something that hadn't occurred to me. This is a temperature within a hive, and they did an experiment where that blue arrow is, they took a queen out of a hive. So it went from being queen right to queenless. Now, obviously, if there's no queen and there's no laying workers, then there won't be brood. And what happens is, when all of the brood is finally hatched, the bees stop managing the temperature. And the hive temperature, as you see there, goes out of the range that's needed for brood and just goes to ambient. Which I found absolutely fascinating. So basically you can detect the absence of a queen by whether the temperature is being managed to stay within the brood temperature. So interesting, you can actually pick that. And that, I hadn't imagined that bees were smart enough to only put their energy into managing temperature if there was brood to take care of. And no brood, and they save the energy and their resources for other things, like worrying about the future, I guess. Next one. This now shows Libby's hive in our apiary. So this is just one hive within our small little apiary. These big spikes are just noise. When you fiddle and change things, you'll get outliers, you'll get silly readings that really you just have to ignore. But what you can see is this last season that we didn't have a whole lot going on in October and November, and it was pretty boring right up to really the start of December, and then, it may not be clear, but you'll have to believe me, from there on it started to rise. Okay? And it kept on rising. We did an inspection here, spring inspection, kept on rising, and we thought, whoopee-doo, there's enough now, and we harvested, and that's what this is. That changes when you take supers off and you put the old ones back on and so on. So that's what all the weight changes there are. And after that, we thought, last year we got a nice lot of honey coming in with clover. We should get another rise into summer. We wish, because what happened, in fact, was that it stayed pretty stable, and since then it has continued to decline. So we haven't had a summer nectar flow out of clover this year, or if there wasn't that much of it. Not enough for us to harvest, and barely enough to keep the bees alive. One of the other things you'll notice is that from time to time there's these little changes. Okay? Now, in some cases it's because we say put a super on, and obviously the weight's going to change. But the other thing that sometimes changes is as you jiggle the box, you change the location of the scales and the fulcrum underneath the box, and that changes the way that it's the weight that it records. Can you have the next one, please? Yeah. So as you can see, the scales are under the front there, fulcrum there, and when you're doing a spring inspection, it would be nice if you could actually put the scales and things back in exactly the position where they were before. But you're not going to do that. It's going to be a little bit different. And as a consequence, what it says the weight is changes because you've changed the places where the measuring is taking place. It's fairly sensitive to that. So that's one of the... it's the reality of the system. I'm not sure whether it's a deficiency, but it is in the nature of it. It's the reality. Anyway, next one. You also get measurements of temperature. In this case, it's the ambient temperature that you get from the weight scale. Next one. And it tells you how the battery's going. So mine's been in for 6 months or so it'll be time to change the battery soon. Next one. Now, the pictures I was showing you before were for a single hive. This is the way it displays multiple hives. So if you have multiple hives in an apiary that are being monitored, you can set it up so you can have, in one view, you can see all of the hives in your apiary. And again, you're going to have to believe me if you're down the back, but this shows from the start of February right through the middle of March, a modest decline in weight over time. So at a time when we were really hoping to have some clover coming in, we didn't get that. So the message, I think, is time to start feeding. Now, we don't just go on what the scales say, we also look inside. And what we also see is stuff all in the way of reserves in that hive. So it's time to feed, and it's probably not going to get any better now. So we better feed them proper. Next one. So in summary, I've learned that I need to get fairly close to the hive with an iPhone to actually suck down the data, and that's 2 or 3 meters. I was expecting to do it further away, but you do need to get pretty close. The weight jumps around with things like changes in the scales and support positions, or adding and removing supers, or if you put a brick on top of the hive, that's going to change the weight, obviously. And even so, even though the weight that you see is recorded jumps around a little bit, and you have to make these allowances, you can see whether the weight is increasing, decreasing, or pretty steady. And that's very, very, very helpful. Next. One of the things you're encouraged to do with Broodminder, I mentioned that it's on this cloud, so everybody is encouraged to be a citizen scientist. And all of those little dots are the places where they have customers with their Broodminder stuff who are willing to let people look at some of their information. Now, in Australia there's so few sites that you really can't tell much. But if you're in the US, for example, which is their home, then you could actually probably look around and almost state by state see how things are going and get a feel for an overall season in different parts of the country. So then it could be perhaps quite useful. Here, until there's a lot more people using them, it's not so useful. Libby? So I bought the equipment we have from the Urban Beehive in Sydney. They keep stock and they send them to you. It's quite simple. It's not particularly difficult to figure out how to set it up. And the manufacturer is in Wisconsin, in the USA. Next. So that's what I've been fiddling with. Are there any questions about it?
Are you enjoying it?
Oh, it's neat. You might be familiar with an expression, the Internet of Things. And in a previous life, I was into high-tech and communications and stuff, so this is neat shit as far as I'm concerned. Whether it's cost-effective beekeeping,
It's cheaper lifting the hive up.
cheaper. Could be.
And you do get quite you can get quite used to what your hive feels like in the day.
I will believe you here. But it hasn't happened for me yet. Sam?
What should your hive weigh if it was 2 seconds?
Say again, please.
What is the average weight of a hive?
I don't think there's any such thing, to be honest. In visiting Peter's apiary on Sunday, he has hives ranging from nukes to 1 boxes to 2 boxes to 3 boxes to 3 boxes for supers. Some of them with a lot of bees, some with very few bees, some of them with lots of resources, some of them with not much. I do not believe that there is a single answer to that question. What there is looking inside and seeing whether there is a goodly number of bees, an appropriate amount of brood for the season, and sufficient resources so that you think there's a shot that they might make it through the winter in the spring. And if that sounds like dodging the question, it's the best I can do. But I honestly have to believe you can't just say it has to be 60 kilos done. It's absolutely not the answer. It is whatever the resources and the bees are up to at that time, unfortunately.
Does your observations and feelings about your hive inspections agree with your measurements?
Oh yes.
So you had the feeling that things were trending up and down?
Well, it's interesting. Invariably, when I look at the hive, I'll see these bees coming and going, and I'll see a bit of pollen coming in. I'll think, aren't they beautiful? They're happy little campers. It's all wonderful. And then I'll look inside, and by geez, they're having a hell of a time. And it's not nearly as good as I think. So I tend to be a little bit optimistic on the outside of a hive, and I need to look inside to actually see what's happening. This gives you another way of looking inside without actually having to open it all the time. And there's a school of thought which is natural beekeeping, where you aim to open the hive as little as possible, as infrequently as possible. And twice a year might be okay, but you wouldn't want to do it more. And then there's the department seems to think you should open it every second week just in case. So I like the idea of reducing the amount of time spent looking inside a hive. It's less disruptive to the bees, but I still want to know what's going in. I'm not very good at guessing it from the outside. That much I have learned.
Is there a check way of doing it? Like you get a set of scales and just put it at the back of the hive and just measure it every now and again to see what the change is? So, just a set of scales. And just
as I said, I thought I would try that. what I found is unless they're designed for the purpose and temperature stabilised, you will get readings varying all over the shop.
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying leave it there, just put it there every, couple of weeks or whatever, take it out.
But it's the same thing. It's still being outside. It's still got a different temperature. I don't think so. I think you need something which is designed for the purpose. And if you just try and use some miscellaneous scales, as I tried, it's not going to give you anything useful.
The other one might just give you an indication as to whether we're increasing.
No, I doubt you get anything you could rely on in any way, unfortunately.